reason you'll be late for a bad one, and it's only 5:30 anyway. Plenty of time, Bunty agreed. Fred and Nobby did take the horses up to the valley, didn't they? Said Sybil. Yes, Sybil, you watched them go, said Bunty. She looked over Sybil's head to the gaunt figure of her husband, who was standing in the hall doorway. He shrugged hopelessly. Only the other day he was running up the stairs as the clocks were striking 6, Sybil said, calmly soaping young Sam with a sponge shaped like a teddy bear. The very last second. You wait and see.
Enjoy the flight. System check. Stand by. Scanning.
He wanted to sleep. He'd never felt this tired before. Vimes slumped to his knees and then fell sideways onto the sand. When he forced his eyes open, he saw pale stars above him and had once again the sensation that there was someone else present.
Stand by. Scanning.
He turned his head, wincing at the stab of pain, and saw a small but brightly lit folding chair on the sand. A robed figure was reclining in it reading a book. A scythe was stuck in the sand beside it. A white skeletal hand turned a page. "You'll be Death, then," said Vimes after a while. "Ah, Mr. Vimes, astute as ever. Got it in one," said Death, shutting the book on his finger to keep the place. "I've seen you before. I have walked with you many times, Mr. Vimes." "And this is it, is it?" "Has it never struck you that the concept of a written narrative is somewhat strange?" said Death. Vimes could tell when people were trying to avoid something they really didn't want to say, and it was happening here. "Is it?" he insisted. "Is this it?" "Could be." "Could be? What sort of answer is that?" said Vimes. "A very accurate one. You see, you are having a near-death experience, which inescapably means that I must undergo a near-Vimes experience. Don't mind me. Carry on with whatever you were doing. I have a book." Vimes rolled over onto his stomach, gritted his teeth, and pushed himself onto his hands and knees again. He managed a few yards before slumping back down. He heard the sound of a chair being moved. "Shouldn't you be somewhere else?" he said. "I am," said Death, sitting down again. "But you're here." "As well." Death turned the page and, for a person without breath, managed a pretty good sigh. "It appears that the butler did it." "Did what?" "It is a made-up story, very strange. All one need do is turn to the last page and the answer is there. What, therefore, is the point of deliberately not knowing?" It sounded like gibberish to Vimes, so he ignored it. Some of the aches were gone, although his head still hammered. There was an empty feeling everywhere. He just wanted to sleep. "Is that clock right?" "I'm afraid it is, Sybil." "I'll just go outside and wait for him then." "I'll have the book ready," said Lady Sybil. "He won't let anything stop him, you know." "I'm sure he won't," said Bunty. "Although things can be very treacherous in the lower valley at this time of—" Her husband began, and was fried into silence by his wife's stare. It was 6 minutes to 6. It was a very little watery sound, and it came from somewhere in Vimes's trousers. After a few moments, enough time to recollect that he had both hand and trousers, he reached down and, after a struggle, freed the gooseberry from his pocket. The case was battered, and the imp, when Vimes had got the flap open, was quite pale. "Oggle, soggle!" Vimes stared at it. It was a talking box. It meant something. "Woggle, soggle, lob!" Slowly, Vimes tipped the box up. Water poured out of it. "You weren't listening! I was shouting and you weren't listening!" the imp whined. "It's 5 minutes to 6. Read to young Sam." Vimes dropped the protesting box on his chest and stared up at the pale stars. "Must read to young Sam," he murmured, and shut his eyes. They snapped open again. "Got to read to young Sam!" The stars were moving. It wasn't the sky. How could it be the sky? This was a bloody cave, wasn't it? He rolled over and got to his feet in one movement. There were more stars now, drifting along the walls. The worms were moving with a purpose. Overhead, they had become a glowing river. Although they were flickering a little, the lights were also coming back on in Vimes's head. He peered into what was now no longer blackness, but merely gloom, and gloom was like daylight after the darkness that had gone before. "Got to read to young Sam," he whispered, to a cavern of giant stalactites and stalagmites, all gleaming with water. "To read to young Sam." Stumbling and sliding through shallow pools, running across the occasional patch of white sand, Vimes followed the lights. Sybil tried not to look at the worried faces of her host and hostess as she crossed their hall. She glared at the grandfather clock. The minute hand was nearly on the 12 and trembling. She threw open the front door. There was no Sam there and no one galloping down the road. The clock struck the hour. She heard someone step quietly beside her. "Would you like me to read to the young man, madam?" said Willikins. "Perhaps a man's voice would—" "No, I'll go up," said Sybil quietly. "You wait here for my husband. He won't be long," she added firmly. "Yes, madam. He'll probably be quite rushed." "I shall usher him up without delay, madam." "He will be here, you know." "Yes, madam." "He will walk through walls." Sybil climbed the stairs as the chimes ended. The clock was a wrong clock, of course it was. Young Sam had been installed in the old nursery of the house, a rather sombre place full of greys and browns. There was a truly frightening rocking horse, all teeth and mad glass eyes. The boy was standing up in his cot. He was smiling, but the smile faded into puzzlement as Sybil pulled up a chair and sat down next to him. "Daddy has asked Mummy to read to you tonight, Sam," she announced brightly. "Won't that be fun?" Her heart did not sink. It could not. It was already as low as any heart could go, but it curled up and whimpered as she watched the little boy stare at her, at the door, at her again, and then throw back his head and scream. Vimes, half limping and half running, tripped and fell into a shallow pool. He stumbled over a dwarf, a dead one, very dead. So dead, in fact, that the dripping water had built a small stalagmite on him, and with a film of milky stone had cemented him to the